Hello everybody, so we're here to hopefully try and give you some top tips to help you stay on track during your PhD. Before I sort of go into it, just a quick show of hands because I haven't been here this morning, so apologies if you've already done this. Who hasn't started yet? Excellent. And who is in their first year? Brilliant. Second? Third? Anyone beyond? Fourth? Cool.
20th?
Yeah. And anyone not like a PhD student, lecturers or anything like that? Couple. Okay. Cool. Brilliant. So today we're going to talk about us. We're going to give you a very quick introduction to who we are. That's going to be quite short. And then I suppose we are going to be talking about us in the sense that we're going to be sharing our experiences and the experiences of our peers. And then we are going to basically talk about what we think you guys might want to expect from a PhD, but the key message is every single journey is unique. Some top tips, and then hopefully have some time for questions, but we want this to be reasonably informal, so if we say something that you feel needs more explanation, or you want to ask us questions, feel free. I should have checked with my speakers.
No, just jump in at any point. If there's something that isn't clear or you just want to ask something, just raise your hand and say, no, what do you mean by that?
Yeah,
that's fine.
Definitely. So, quick introductions.
Okay, so I'm Amy. I'm coming towards the end of the second year of my PhD, and I work in an ESRC-funded project called the Centre for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity. And I'm kind of split between the psychology pathway and the environment sustainability pathway. So I look at what is a good life in a world of environmental limits, what are the problems with consumerism, what are our alternatives to that.
My name's Sarah. I am in the third year of my PhD, so I've got about 9 months left to go. I'm a health psychologist, so my research is looking at antibiotic use in the livestock industry in the UK. So exploring what vets and farmers think about using antibiotics in their animals.
One more, I think. And I did actually remember to put, I always forget, to put the doctor in front. So yes, I'm Mike Brock. So I was funded by the ESRC, and I completed my PhD in March 2015, so just over 3 years ago, and I'm a lecturer in economics over at the University of East Anglia. My research area that I did my PhD in and now still lecture in is environmental economics, in particular looking at how we can try and gauge people's value for the wildlife and the environment around them. I did my PhD, started in October 2011, finished in October 2014, and then had the Viva, and then made the corrections I had from that, and it was all done by March in 2015, which is time that's flown by. And since then I've been a lecturer, started part-time, then moved to full-time, and now I've been doing that for 3 to 4 years.
So proof. You can do it. You'll get to the
sort
end.
Sort of.
Yeah. Cool. So, what to expect during your PhD? Lots of different things. You're going to have lots and lots of fun along the way. You are definitely going to encounter some challenges along the way. One of the things we kind of put up there is uncertainty versus sudden clarity. You will have days where you literally do not know what you are doing, where you wonder why on earth you picked your topic, why you wondered why on earth you picked that particular methodology, that approach, why did I do that research question, what was I thinking? But actually also, all of a sudden, you will suddenly know the answer. And that comes with time to think, perseverance. It's not that you just have a sudden flash of inspiration, it's that the effort that you put in, suddenly the wood will clear and you will see the answer.
And sometimes lots of different parts can be coming, kind of you're working on one part here and one part there, and you're not quite seeing how everything links up, and then you can suddenly have a day where you're like, oh, now I know how I'm going to combine these things in my thesis, or now I see how that compares to this. And like I say, it's a really strange phenomenon, and people think, well, what if that doesn't happen? But it happens to pretty much everybody, at least making some of those connections as they go through the PhD.
Definitely. And also, that kind of feeling of like, I know what I'm doing, I don't know what I'm doing, that's kind of normal. You'll have that flow and ebb. Sometimes in the same day, that will happen several times. And also, as Mike said, it does kind of happen over time. So I was rereading some notes this morning for a chapter that I'm working on some papers that I read a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting link, because I read something, I made a note on it, I forgot it. 2 years later, I reread that note. I'm quite glad I made that note. So it is a real process of learning lots, and tentacles go out, and you really can't see the wood for the trees.
And say you feel like you're stuck in this, I don't know what I'm doing, for like longer than you wish you were. Do you have any advice to how to like bring yourself back up to that?
Yeah, I do. I've got one piece of advice that really helps. If you are getting really, you feel like you're stuck in a rut and you're like, well, I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere with this. Honestly, I think for a week, just put it away. Put it away, ignore it. I had this at the end of my second year of my PhD. I didn't realise how burnt out I was, actually. And I was getting really frustrated that I didn't feel like I was making progress. At the very last minute, when this was the first week in October, I went and booked a last minute holiday away, probably as cheap as you could ever go because I was a PhD student, and just took a week away. Didn't even take my phone or my iPad or anything like that. I just was completely disconnected for a whole week, came back, and it just helped me. It helped me actually think about not just maybe getting clarity on the thing that you were maybe stuck in a bit of a rut with, but it also helps you get a little bit of clarity on exactly, if I get hung up on this one point, how important is that compared to other things in the bigger picture? And that can actually be really good. And it's tricky advice, particularly towards the end of a PhD, to be like, just take some time off. But you'd be amazed how taking that kind of, what is a step back from the research, can actually mean you can kind of plough forward when you come back to it. It's a really, it seems tough, but it's a good idea to do.
Yeah.
What I found useful doing my PhD was to go back to my central question. Because sometimes you go so far away from it, and there's so many complexities, that if you could just go back to that question, sometimes that can focus you again. It may not work, but it's something to try.
Yeah. Remembering why you're doing what you're doing can help, and that's quite useful just for keeping you on track in general, because the days when you kind of think, why am I getting out of bed? If you can remember that sort of central passion, that central original question that you had, that can really help. Definitely. And I guess the last point on this slide was personal growth. Amy, I don't know if you wanted to say anything.
Yeah, so you really do change as a person throughout your PhD. Your confidence should grow, even though you will have these knockbacks. You should eventually overcome them. So you should understand that you're a resilient person, you can overcome these things. You almost become your own PR person, and that you're constantly having to prove that your project's worth doing, that you're the right person to be doing it. And so it really helps you to see what your own worth is and see your value as a researcher, as a person as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. Doing the PhD, I kind of felt like I was prepared for it when I started, in the sense that I knew I'd spoken to lots of other PhD students, and I understood that it was going to be hard and that I would have to work hard to set the boundaries I wanted to, which we'll come on to in a bit. So I kind of felt like I've done a master's dissertation, I know my supervisors because I worked with them, I did my master's part-time, so I worked with them over 2 years. I know some of the other psychology students in our department. It's going to be hard, but I know I've got time management skills, I know that I'm fairly driven, I should be okay. And what nobody prepared me for was the emotional aspect of the PhD. It is an emotional roller coaster, but don't let that scare you. I don't mean that in a negative way. It's more just what we're talking about. Some days you will love it, some days you will hate it. You will experience absolute highs of joy, and you will also some days just feel despair. And that's, in a way, a PhD is like a metaphor for life. Life does this, and so does a PhD, but fundamentally we all kind of come out of it okay at the end. Think regression to the mean for any stats heads of people in here, that's what I often think. So we kind of split our talk into some sections. We're going to talk about some time management tips, some planning tips, staying on track, and then some sort of psychological things like your attitude, your approach to your work, and also some sanity maintenance. As I said,
they all overlap as well.
They do, pretty much. In theory, we've got a plan, we've got some notes, so we don't remember key things, but we want you guys to ask questions, and we're bound to talk over each other, and so it's up there. But
so one thing you learn through a PhD is how to talk a lot about yourself and your work.
Yeah.
You'll also find yourself, and I've seen this, somebody who I was house sharing with recently. He was just finishing his PhD in environmental sciences, and my family came to stay. And they made the huge mistake of saying, so what's your PhD on? And 20 minutes later of him basically giving a lecture about his area, which is something to do with marine biology. I just looked at the four faces of my family, like blank, 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 blank. You don't realise how much of an expert you've become. That's another thing for recognising over the course of your PhD. You might think that you're struggling with certain stuff, but you won't realise just how much of a specialist you become in your field, and actually how much knowledge you have that is totally over the head of probably 95% of the rest of the population, and towards the end, probably 99.9% of the population. So bear that in mind.
Yeah, and part of it, linked to what Anglia said, you become a different person, you do become more confident. I'll give you a little quick anecdote. So yeah, Mike's right, you definitely become an expert. There's something called the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, which you may have heard about because it's one of the internship schemes. But basically what they do is they produce like briefing notes on an area of science relevant to policy, and they kind of synthesise the most relevant evidence. And my PhD is understanding the psychological drivers of antibiotic use in the livestock industry in the UK. And one of the post-note calls that went out earlier this year was reducing antimicrobial usage in UK agriculture. I mean, it's literally my PhD, and I spent 3 months mulling over whether I was brave enough to email this team to say, hi, I'm a social scientist doing research, I think it's relevant, I think you should know about it, because everyone forgets the social science aspect of antibiotic resistance. And I did it, and I had a 2-hour phone call with the lady, and she was really nice, and she asked me lots of questions, and then I was like, oh, I contributed to policy. And I mean, maybe I won't, maybe I'll get like one little line in this post note, but the reason I tell you it is it took me 3 months to be brave enough to email that person, and I did it. And then when I was telling my mentor about it, and I told her it took me 3 months, but in the end I did it anyway, and she just laughed, because that's kind of part of it. Is it feels very alien to say I'm good enough, I know enough on this subject, because we don't think we do, because we always compare up to our supervisors, to other people in the field. You know, when you go to conferences and you see people, you're like, gosh, you know so much. I can't be that person, but you kind of already are. So, yeah.
And other people are looking at you in that way, you just don't realise it.
Yeah, it's true. That is
so
definitely true.
Whatever you're thinking about someone else, they're probably having that same thought about you. It's just, I think people in academia are quite modest, when they don't always need to be. So
yeah, that's true. Ooh, so on to some tips then. So I think the first one is procrastination and designating time for thinking. So we've split them up this way. So procrastination is almost an inevitability. You will face tasks and times in your PhD journey when you just don't want to do what it is you most need to do. Find ways of overcoming procrastination. Occasionally you can give into it. Like, it's okay to sometimes go, it's really not working, I need to walk away from this, or I need to just clear my inbox, or there's something else that's distracting me. Sometimes you can do that, but that's not going to get you a PhD. You've got to face it. You've got to deal with that ethics application, design that study, have that difficult meeting with your supervisors, start writing, find a way of taking notes that works for you. Something that I was told is, I don't know if anyone's heard of Eat the Frog. Does anyone know Eat the Frog? So basically, imagine that your job involves, it's in your contract, in your job description, every day you have to eat a frog. So you can choose to eat that frog at 9 o'clock in the morning, or you can choose to eat it at 5 o'clock. If you leave it till 5 o'clock, you're going to spend all day worrying about that grimy, slimy, horrible frog that you've got to eat. Or you can just eat it at 9 o'clock, and it's pretty grim, but it's done with, and now you can enjoy the rest of the day. And the idea is basically there's going to be some crap tasks, there's going to be some stuff you don't want to have to do. Just do them. It's kind of the message. And how you do that is different for everybody, but find a way that works for you and adapt it over time as well. Any other tips on procrastination or anything? Do you think?
I kind of budget a couple of hours a day for procrastination into my office hours. So I kind of come to my office maybe 2 hours, an hour or two before everyone else in my office. So they all think that I'm working way harder than them when I'm not. It's just I'm coming in and I'm going on the internet for an hour or two every morning. But I know that I have to do that, but I can still, if I've come in an hour and done it in the morning, then I can still start work at a decent time.
And those sort of habits stay with you through your life. I do that now as a lecturer. So I will actually get in, some of you who are at uni know, I get in at like 6 in the morning, But I do that in the knowledge that I will spend the first hour procrastinating, but I know that actually that means that from 7 until the rest of the day, I will actually get on and do the work that I need to do. It's amazing how the things that you learn to do through your PhD, in terms of many of those things, time management, in terms of kind of the tools that you use and how you interact with people, they actually stay with you way on through after you finish the PhD, regardless of what career you go into after that.
Time management is a massive skill in whatever industry you're in, and that's one of the reasons that I thought I'd be alright with my PhD, because I had quite good time management skills already. I already knew how to plan for meetings, manage time wasters, deal with distractions. I worked in quite a number of different reactive industries where you were interrupted by telephone calls or other people demanding your time, and you still get that in academia. You will get that during your PhD. There are endless opportunities for distraction of your own doing and of other people's doing.
I think that comes on to that point, that final point with purple bubble. Learning when to say no is a skill that's tough. I still can't do it. As we were saying, I come here, I like to be able to say and do things that I think are going to be useful for other people, and it's tricky to say no, particularly if people like your supervisor ask me to do things, or maybe a head of school, and you think, if I do that, maybe that might help if I want to get a job in the future, staying at the university. The thing we were saying just before we started the talk, and I think is a good way to view this, there are so many opportunities with a PhD, but when you're thinking about whether taking on something else or not, think to yourself, when you would be in the middle of that task, would you feel guilty to not work on the PhD? If the answer is no, I won't feel guilty, I think it's useful for me. Maybe it's some sort of particular teaching that you can take on that will be useful. Maybe it's some sort of training that you have absolutely no idea in, but you think is good for a future career, then do it. Take it on, because it's going to be useful for you, and you've got 3-4 years in order to accrue those skills. If it's, a load of marking that you think you're going to make a bit of money from, but it's going to take you forever, and you're right at the end of your PhD, and you're in the middle of doing it, you're thinking, I should be working on my 3rd chapter, don't do it. Honestly, you would be better to say no and feel like you're going to get the PhD done than trying to just say yes to please people, or yes because you think it's going to earn you a short amount of cash in the short term.
So saying no is hard, and one of the other ways of judging whether or not you say no, because particularly for those of you who are just about to start when you go through your induction year at university, or for those of you who remember your first induction week, particularly we talked about this because we're both at Surrey, you will get lots of advice from people like us who are like older and wiser, and we've been through it and we know it. We don't know it, we just figured it out for ourselves essentially. But you'll get kind of all this stuff like do some public engagement, do some teaching, make sure you go to conferences and seminars outside of your area, and think beyond your PhD. What do you want to do? Try and get your research published whilst you're doing your PhD, because it will help you with your grant applications and all of these sort of things. And it's brilliant advice, because you do need to future think, but you also need to pace yourself. You've got 3 or 4 years to do it. You don't have to do it all in year 1, as I was told about 6 months into my PhD. Chill out, Sarah, it's fine. Tick some boxes. You've got another 2.5 years to tick the rest. And also, you don't have to tick all of the boxes. If at some point during your PhD you realise, I am never going to be a lecturer, do you need to do that teaching experience and the marking experience? And maybe you want it because it will help you be a rounded person, or you need the money, or anything else. But if you suddenly realise, I have a destiny to do this or not to do this, drop some of the extracurricular stuff, be strategic, realise I've already done that thing, so I don't need to do it again, perhaps, unless there's value in it of a different kind. So yeah.
I think it just comes down to if you enjoy doing the thing or not. Don't do things that you don't enjoy because you feel you have to do them. If you don't enjoy doing that task, then should that really be a route you're pursuing anyway?
Yeah.
So yeah, you're allowed to make your choices based on whether they make you happy and you like doing them, rather than just ticking boxes because you feel that you have to do that.
Yeah, and there'll be some things you feel uncomfortable doing. Like, you have to present. There comes a point where you have to stand up in front of people and you present your research, if for no other reason than because it's good practice for your viva. But some people enjoy presenting more than others, and so the ones that are really good at it and really enjoy it will be the ones that start to volunteer more for the public engagement events, for example, or whatever. And, you know, people, when you look at academics, they're all very, very different people, and they've all got very different career tracks and career histories in terms of their sort of their niches and what they do. So, you know, so yeah. So time management. We're not doing a very good job of time management. It's already
I was just going to say we should move
move
planning.
on, shouldn't we? Yeah. So planning, go.
I think a lot of those things under planning we've kind of already talked about. I think maybe the one that you might be particularly interested in, particularly at the start of the PhD, is looking at the supervision and how that works with your supervisor. Probably the worst advice I'm going to give, or it's not really a tip, but everybody's is different. But that's a little bit like lots of things with the PhD. The crucial thing is, as early as you can do, find out what works for you. And make that clear with the supervisor. The supervisor is not something you need to be scared of. You know, the supervisor is somebody who wants to make sure that the relationship works well for both sets of you. For example, I met my supervisors every week, and that worked well for me. I liked having that commitment of meeting them every week. And okay, there wasn't much to be done, but in the space of a week, and perhaps that was what was quite manageable for me. I know other people who only met their supervisors every 2 months, but they found that worked for them. But have that dialogue as early as possible, because it's better that the supervisor knows what your expectation is and what you think will work best for you, even if you end up reviewing that because you don't feel like you're getting the work done, or maybe you're kind of panicking because feel like you've got to do too much each and every week. But they want to know, they don't want to be in a position where they're just telling you how often to meet and how much work to do. They want that to be a conversation that you have between the 2 or 3 of you, and set that out from the start, and just find out what works for all of you. And like I say, I think that's by the end, your supervisor shouldn't be viewed as your boss. Your supervisor should be viewed as someone who you're working and collaborating with, and certainly that's how I felt by the end of mine. They know, and this will happen, you may not feel it, but it comes back to what we said earlier, by the end of your PhD, you are the expert, not in your particular field, not the supervisor. The supervisor is there to guide you, but by the end, you know about your topic more than they do. And that's where I think that move from being maybe somebody who you have this kind of awe and respect for and think, oh, I just must go by what they say, to somebody who you can have kind of a colleague-style dialogue with in terms of how the research is going and what you're finding, is something that is just a transition that you need to be ready to embrace from the first day.
Mm-hmm. Can I just say about contingency planning briefly? Because a lot of people are in the first year and so have the luxury of still having time to do this. Something in your PhD will go wrong. You will do a study and the results won't come out how you're expecting them to do. Plan for that at the start. Have a diagram saying, this is what my first study is, the results could be this, this, or this. What am I going to do if I get each of these sets of results? Rather than just having this one line that you're insisting that you follow and you believe that you will, because it's very rare that anyone does. So one of my office mates spent the whole of her first year planning this big study that she was going to do with young kids, getting them to make videos about what they think a good life was. She spent her whole first year planning this project, and she was going to do it in the second year. She's now at the end of her second year, and the kids have not turned up to do this project. So she's now 2 years into a PhD and does not have any data, but she didn't plan for this to not work. And so now she's in a really kind of stressed out, uptight state, trying to figure out what am I going to do in this final year to make sure I still get a PhD. If at the start she had planned for this project to not work, she'll be able to quickly move on to something different now rather than being in this state of limbo.
And some of that contingency planning is actually don't plan in some ways. You know, the worst thing I think you can almost feel like you have to do at the start of the PhD is say, right, year 1 I'm doing this, year 2 I'm doing this, and year 3 I'm definitely doing this. I know that the research I was doing by the end of my third year, I had absolutely no idea that I would be doing that when I started my PhD, and that is what the majority of people find. Yes, they probably end up doing a very similar pattern of work in their first year than they thought they were going to, because it's probably what came from their research proposal. But by the end of the PhD, you have often deviated, partly because your topic and your subject area has moved on from then in 3 years, but you'll actually find you've weaved yourself to doing something that you completely didn't expect to do. I'll tell you, my work was looking at people's value for local wildlife. And in particular, I had a proposal that was based around, well, okay, can you use choice experiments to work this out? I did not expect that by the end of my third year I was going to the Forestry Commission trying to get them to run an experiment in finding out people's attitudes towards culling and killing deer. That's how my PhD went. And there's no way that I could see that that was the path it was going to take, but that was the results of the first year led to a theory about how people were making valuations. That led us to think, well, what about in this situation and that situation? By the third year, you're doing something completely different.
Absolutely.
And that's not an unusual story. No. The majority of people find that's how their PhD goes.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you've necessarily done anything wrong or that your research hasn't worked, or if the research hasn't worked, that's okay because you had a backup plan. And when you come to your year one confirmation or upgrade exam, part of what an examiner is looking at is what is the contingency, because part of what they're examining you on is what have you done so far, do your plans look like they're going to fulfill a PhD thesis, but how risky are your plans? You know?
How flexible are you prepared to be if things go wrong?
Yeah, because ultimately you have to finish one way or another, and I've changed my plans. What I thought I was going to be doing for my final study, I've got to a point where I'm at 9 months to go, but I had a conflict of time to put in the design work for quite a big intervention study. Now, when I'm finishing up other things, there aren't enough hours in the day, and because I wanted to do something with students that needed to happen in semester 1 next year, I couldn't flex putting off that design and that ethics application because it wouldn't fit with the school timetable or the academic timetable. So you have to be flexible and you have to be prepared to make those decisions. And it might sound daunting now, but that will happen. That's fine. And everything takes longer than you think. So that's kind of what we know by this local versus global thinking is you need to plan your day, your week, in order to... Your big goal is to write 60,000, 80,000 words, whatever it might be for your discipline. But there's a hell of a lot of other goals along the way to get there, and you can't know what all of those are. So you kind of need to have a bit of a Gantt chart to begin with, because you need to think, how long will it take me to get ethics if I need ethics? How long will it take me to get out in the field and collect that data? And dependent on the nature of the work, am I doing follow-up? How many times am I collecting data? And when do I expect those things to happen? But none of that will actually happen to your plan. My Gantt chart now, 9 months to go, is not what it looked like 3 months in, for example. But I'm still going to finish, and I'm still going to have data and a thesis and everything else. So you have to think about the big stuff. You have to think, what am I aiming for? But if you're anything like me, you don't have to park it, because that's just overwhelming. I need to know, what am I doing today? And what do I need to achieve this week to kind of keep me on track? And it changes week by week. It changes, in year 1 it's very different to year 2. Those goals change, don't they? But so for me, I have to think quite a lot, what do I need to do today? What's my to-do list? And so on. But you can get stuck in the to-do list as well. Sometimes you have to kind of pull back and go, of all the stuff on here, what's actually going to contribute to the thesis? Yeah, that's right.
Where should my priorities be?
Yeah. So staying on track is, it's a balance of all of these different things. Did you want to speak about balancing?
Are you ready to present?
Oh yeah, definitely.
This is just a good tactic for staying on track, is if your supervisor was to message you right now and say, I've got a meeting with so-and-so tomorrow morning, I want you to come and present your research project, you kind of need to get yourself to the place where that wouldn't fill you with dread, and you just be like, yeah, fine, I've got kind of a presentation ready to go.
That also is very useful for a conference. If there's suddenly you see a call for a conference that is just in your research area, and you see, submit abstracts by the end of the week, it's great to have something ready, right, to be able to at least send something. If you get accepted, you've got plenty of time to work on the fine-tuning the presentation, but it's great to feel like you're prepared to actually get there and be able to talk about the research you're doing.
It is.
Yeah.
So this stuff, who wants to open up?
Perfectionism.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, you've probably heard this before. The best type of PhD is a finished PhD. It's not a perfect PhD. If you're insistent on producing your absolute perfect PhD, that's your absolute best piece of work, you can keep going forever.
You'll
You'll always
never
find
finish.
something to
You will
improve.
never finish if you are trying to submit the perfect
Yeah.
PhD.
You just need a PhD that's good enough for you to get a PhD. You're just going to pass or you're going to fail. You're not going to get A star, A, B, C, whatever. You'll get it or you won't. So as long as your PhD is above that pass mark, that's fine. It doesn't really matter whether it's here or here.
Yeah.
So it's just...
And the examiner in your Viva is not going to turn around and say, oh, I wish you'd, on page 32, I wish you'd restructured that sentence slightly differently. They're not reading it that strongly, and they're not judging your quality of your English. They're making sure the content is there, not necessarily that it looks like you could read it as poetry.
And perfectionism is a hard one to overcome.
Yes.
A lot of people doing a PhD are by nature tenacious. I don't know, there's lots of different words to describe, but you know, working hard and doing your best is part of how you got to be a funded PhD student. You know, you have to have that kind of character to persevere, to get good grades and so on, and do well at degree level and all the rest of it. And also, because academia is quite a competitive environment, and we were saying, you know, we always feel like we don't know as much as the next person, there is, you know, inherently we don't want to show our weaknesses, but it's okay, we've all got weaknesses. But that perfectionism feels like a protective thing sometimes. You know, if I just write this paper brilliantly, it won't get rejected. But rejection's normal. I was in a talk this morning at our doctoral college conference in Surrey, and there was a quite senior person was saying, you know, actually, if you've never had a paper rejected, you know what, once you're kind of like into the publication mode, if you've never had a paper rejected, you're doing it wrong because you're not aiming high enough.
Yeah.
Like papers will get rejected, and that's fine, but it's not a personal slight. It doesn't mean you did bad research, you did bad writing. That's not what it means. It just means they get a lot of papers, or the editor didn't like the look of your abstract, or you know, it could mean anything. And you just take a day, park it, dust yourself off, do something else, go for a walk, make yourself feel happy, and then face it again another day. So perfectionism is kind of hard to overcome, but recognising it is the first step.
The one I definitely just want to talk about is the take up an achievements hobby, which I know that you were both intrigued by. I put that in.
Yeah.
So the reason I want to say this, the very first day of my PhD, we had a whole social sciences day of induction. The one piece of advice that I got from that day, which is probably the best advice I got, which is what I wanted to share with you, is the idea, as we've talked about, PhD, 3-4 year project. There are going to be times when you don't feel in control. There are going to be times when you don't necessarily know where you're going. There are going to be times when you don't necessarily feel like you're achieving anything. So the advice I was given is take up a hobby which can tick some of those boxes in your own mind. So a lot of people decide to take up going to the gym or going and taking up a sport because they can, for example, time themselves. They're in control about how much they go and what they do and make themselves a realistic target, and they can tick off how they make that progress. My one that I took up, anybody here in Norwich knows that I do this, my hobby I took up was baking. I took up baking as my hobby that I did if I was really struggling with a PhD, and it still ticks all those boxes. You have to follow a set of pretty easy rules. You're in control of how you're doing that, and you make that, hopefully you don't burn anything, but you get that achievement at the end of it, that short-term, quick achievement. So if you can find a type of hobby that can tick those types of boxes, do it. And it comes back to the point that was asked earlier, what about when I'm stuck in a rut? Well, mine would be I go and fire up the oven and cook something different. But whatever it is, it's a great way for you to be able to relieve that stress, be able to feel like, okay, this is something completely different that I enjoy doing, that I get these goals from, and suddenly the PhD doesn't feel like it's such a foreign, horrible world to me.
Yeah.
So that's what I meant by an achievements hobby. And like I say, for a lot of people it's sport, but if it's something that you feel you can be passionate about and take up and do. I'd done no cooking, well, I'd done some cooking. I'd not done baking before I did the PhD, and now, as like I say, those that are here know, I now end up doing like 300 cake sales to make money for charity. So it's my way of actually relieving stress. And that's one of the other things that's come through after the PhD. You know, when I've got really stressful times being a lecturer, I actually go and enjoy spending an evening doing cooking. And to me, that still ticks those boxes. So that's my one big tip for you, is try and find that hobby that ticks those boxes.
And I think balancing that, are we due to finish at 4? Is it?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
really bad. Is it a break or is it another session? Okay, very quick.
Make sure we wrap up. We're all going to be
Yeah,
here
we're
this
all around.
for this evening at the barbecue. We're all here, so you have questions, you know, you can answer.
I'm not at the barbecue, but I'll be around for a bit, and I'm here tomorrow as well. So, but one thing I did just definitely want to say around is about looking after yourself. Like, it is not a sprint; it's a marathon. It's the London Marathon when it's 30 degrees. It's hard, and you have to pace yourself, and you'll get it wrong. Sometimes you will take on too much, and you will over-egg it, and you will kind of have a couple of days where you're just exhausted. That's fine, but pay attention to that and learn from it.
Yeah.
Do whatever you can to reinforce to yourself that, this is Amy's phrase, you are not your PhD. And as Mike says, do something else to take your mind off it. Garden, go for a walk, learn to bake. I don't know, Amy, what's your thing? Gym.
I thought you said gin.
I mean, gym.
That's not so advisable.
We very, very briefly, mental health problems are quite common amongst PhD students, but equally they're not. Like Amy and I were chatting a bit beforehand, you know, and be aware of it. Know what's normal for you. If you feel stressed, that's normal. If you feel overwhelmed, that's normal. It's part of the journey. But if you start to feel overwhelmed about being overwhelmed, think about it and make use of support systems. Talk to supervisors, peers, the university wellbeing services. You know, even if you're worried about stigma around mental health, there's no stigma in the wellbeing service. That's what they're there for. But fundamentally, look after yourself. Treat your PhD as a job. You do not need to work 70, 80 hours a week. Very occasionally you might need to, but if you plan your time well, you should be able to allow yourself time off. I treat it like a job. I start about 7:30 every day. I finish somewhere between 4 and 5, and I either have a 30-minute lunch break or a 2-hour lunch break, depending on what I need to get done. And normally that involves a walk.
And I was the same. When I did my PhD, I used to get in at 6. I used to leave at 2 or 3. Now, I find that a little bit harder now I'm a lecturer. It seems like my days are getting longer and longer, but I was really rigid with that as a PhD student. You know, and I would make sure. And my housemate was the opposite. The housemate that I lived with, who was doing his PhD at the same time, we used to see each other. We were like the ships in the night, because I would be cycling home, and I'd see him on the bus coming in. And he'd work from like 2, 3 in the afternoon, and he'd go home at like 11 o'clock in the evening. So we didn't really live together. We kind of just got a house sat for each other. But, you know, be strict with yourself in that way. You know, it's good for you in the end. You know, find how you work best, but then stick to that.
I mean, I'm a health researcher, so I know the negative effects of stress related to work. And recovery from work is really important. The main reason that I'm so disciplined with my boundaries, I do flex them when I need to, but the main reason I'm disciplined is because I can have my evenings and weekends off and avoid the PhD guilt. I do not feel guilty about not working on my PhD in the evenings and weekends because I've done my 8 hours.
And I was the same with,
like,
I never used to work at home. I always worked in the office. So sometimes I come in and work on a weekend, but I would never work once I got home. That's good. I guess we're going to probably be kicked out for the next session soon.
So, yeah.
But that was everything. As we say, if you've got any questions, by all means ask us later on in the day or tomorrow for Sarah. But thank you very much for your time.